Take a look through an old South Bend newspaper sometime in the 1870s or the 1880s. Find an issue from July, maybe a day or two after the 4th. The article you're looking for won't be on the front page, and it won't get a big headline, but it will be there. They might call it the Old Settlers Picnic. They might call it a gathering of the original pioneers. The name might change from one newspaper to another, from one year to the next, but the meaning is the same. By the 1870s and 1880s, South Bend had grown exponentially, but there were still those living who remembered when it had just been a few of them. These gatherings were designed to remember and honor the men, women, and children who had been here since before 1835. That wasn't a hard deadline. If you arrived in South Bend a year or two after 1835 but managed to make a significant enough impact, you might sneak your way into an old settlers group. But if you were here by 1835, and you were still here 3 or 4 decades later, you were in the club, no question about it. The youngest had been children when they'd arrived, and they were into their 40s and 50s before the newspaper recognized them as the novelties they were. The oldest ones reached into their 80s and 90s, and of course, plenty of those original pioneers didn't live to see the reunions. The newspapers reported dutifully on the gatherings, answering the questions that the public demanded to know. Where was the picnic? Who provided the music? Who supplied the potato salad? Reporters would be on hand to catalog the speeches and summarize the toasts, and then, at the end, they'd print the attendance, the names of the men, and usually just the men, who attended the gathering. If you're a student of local history, you'd recognize almost all of these names on account of their significant contributions to public and private life across our city. And if you aren't a student of local history, you'd probably recognize all of these names anyway. That's because you've probably driven on all of their streets. Hello and welcome to A Bend in Time, presented by the History Museum in South Bend. I'm your host, Aaron Helman, and during this series, we're going for a drive around South Bend to tell the important, zany, strange, and unexpected tales behind just a few of its street names. During the course of this episode, you'll hear fictional advertisements for very real historical companies and products. We do that to help break up the podcast, provide some levity, to include just a little more history than we could otherwise, and to give you a sense of the time and place when and where all of this is happening. The absence of actual paid advertisements is made possible by the generous underwriting of all 8 episodes in the series by the Doug Hunt family. In this episode, we're running down the stories of 3 of South Bend's earliest pioneers and the streets that remain named in their honor. Obviously, we don't have time to remember every single one of those original settlers, even if we restricted ourselves only to the ones with streets named after them. If I leave out your favorite semi-obscure South Bend pioneer, know that you have my apologies, and I hope we'll catch up to them again in a future episode. We're going to start, though, with the pioneer who has claimed to be the most original of all of them, Pierre Navarre, born in 1787, and the first European-descended person to settle in the place that would later become South Bend. He showed up in 1820, and for just about 3 years, he was the only one. Navarre arrived as a manager for the American Fur Company, and so his first job at his new home was to build a cabin for himself and to establish ongoing relations with the Native Americans in the area. He appears to have done both very well. His cabin is still standing and has since been moved to the grounds of the History Museum. And as for those relations, well, in 1820 he married a Native American woman named Mishawaka. Navarre had a complicated relationship with South Bend, at least during those early years in the 1820s and 1830s. His cabin was located near what is now North Shore Drive, between 31 and Lafayette, directly across the river from the current home of the Studebaker Fountain. His little cabin was notably on the wrong side of the river and beyond the limits of the town and the city for several years. But it wasn't just physical distance that kept Navarre apart from the rest of the burgeoning metropolis. It seems that when Navarre married Mishawaka, he saw himself in many ways as marrying into her family and into her way of life, rather than her marrying into his. In many Native American cultures, that was the common practice, and Navarre was content to continue it. He wasn't nearly as interested in the work of town building as the men who followed him into the region. Today, most historians consider Alexis Coquillard and Lathrop Taylor to be the founders of South Bend, and they relegate Navarre into something of a curiosity. Navarre's voice is unfortunately quiet in the historical record, and that's a shame. He would have almost certainly had something interesting to say. White settlers had a way of nudging native populations out of land that had been theirs for generations, populations that now included Navarre's family. In fact, when those ambitions became real, and when the Indian Removal Acts were signed into law, Navarre went with Mishawaka, her tribe, and their children into the West. He might have been one of those marchers along the trail of death. Some sources allege him to have said that he had no other choice, that by then, he was as much an Indian as any of the others. So Navarre was quiet about town building in the early years, and then absent for some of the busiest years in South Bend's early history, but he did come back. After Mishawaka died in Kansas, Pierre Navarre returned to South Bend sometime before 1850. 30 years after he'd been the first white man to settle, the town around him now had a population of more than 1,500. By then, Navarre was 63 and a widow. He hadn't had a particular interest in town building early on, and he certainly wasn't about to develop one now. He lived quietly with a daughter and died at 77 years old in 1864, the year before South Bend incorporated as a city. Navarre is buried at the Cedar Grove Cemetery at the University of Notre Dame. Navarre Middle School on the west side of town is not particularly close to any place that Pierre Navarre would have lived or done business. Navarre Street is quite a bit closer, less than half a mile from where his cabin used to sit. Although I can't help but notice that Navarre Street sits firmly inside the limits of Old South Bend, in a way that the man himself maybe never really did.
Wake Nicodemus, Richmond is ours. The day of Jubilee has come and the war of rebellion is over. That's right, Richmond has fallen, and so have the prices of clothing at M.W. Stokes Emporium. M.W. Stokes, where the citizens of South Bend, as well as the rest of mankind, are solicited to call, see, and examine before buying elsewhere. And now, back to A Bend in Time, presented by the History Museum.
I always just thought that Ireland Road had something to do with the nation. Maybe something Notre Dame. Maybe something leprechaun related. Wrong, and wrong. I'm wrong a lot. In fact, the Ireland name of Ireland Road predates the Fighting Irish nickname. It even predates the founding of Notre Dame, and quite possibly predates the first Irishmen to arrive in South Bend by more than a decade. As so often happens, Ireland Road is named after a man. Samuel Irvin Houston Ireland was made up of a whole mix of European roots, and yes, it does appear he has an Irish great-great-great-grandparent or two. But by the time he was born in Kentucky in 1807, he was American if he was anything. Generations of his grandparents had lived in Massachusetts and North Carolina and had seen America through Revolution. There's as much English in his lineage as there is Irish, and there's more Native American than either. Sam Ireland came from pioneer stock, the youngest of four, born to a family of homesteaders in Bourbon County, Kentucky. His family's journey took them to the nowhere parts of western Ohio, where by 1828, Sam Ireland, now 21, was a man unto himself and was set to be married. His bride was his cousin Sarah, and in 1828, the two tied the knot just days before Ireland set off onto the world's least romantic honeymoon. Sam left his new wife behind and spent a few months journeying with his good friend Thomas P. Bula in order to scout new lands to the west. And yes, that's Thomas P. Bula, as in Bula Street, in case you're wondering. Bula and Ireland must have liked what they'd seen in St. Joseph County, because they went home, retrieved their families, and came back to build a life in the rough and untamed land around what would become South Bend. The Irelands cleared a farm along Willow Creek, northeast of what would become Mishawaka, just 4 years ahead of that city's founding. Sam and Sarah Ireland would later be remembered as Mishawaka's very first residents. So, how did Sam Ireland, an early Mishawakan of all things, end up getting invitations to those early settlers' gatherings in South Bend? It's because of what he did for the county, christened St. Joseph County, in 1830. Remember, in the years before South Bend was incorporated in 1865, the county was the only real local government that the people of South Bend knew. And if you knew the county government, you knew Sam Ireland. As St. Joseph County became more mature, Sam Ireland ran for office and became the county's first assessor. His first job was to catalog every single property line in the county and correspond with every single property owner. It's not an exaggeration to say that for a brief moment in history, Sam Ireland knew every family in St. Joseph County, and every family in St. Joseph County knew Sam Ireland. By all accounts, they loved him. From Walkerton to Osceola, from Lakeville to German Township, Sam Ireland had received a folksy nickname that would stick with him for the rest of his life. He'd become St. Joseph County's very own Uncle Sam. The moniker dotted his correspondence and was his most common address whenever the man was mentioned in the newspaper. All across the nation, everyone already knew who that patriotic Uncle Sam was. He'd been popularized during the War of 1812. Only in St. Joseph County did the name mean anything different. For as much as pioneer-style homesteading had defined Uncle Sam's early life, it turns out he was more cosmopolitan than his roots would indicate. By 1851, he'd taken a job in sales with the St. Joseph Iron Works in Mishawaka and built a downtown home for his family at 114 Northwest Street. His home abutted by the original Mishawaka High School. Sam and Sarah Ireland had 5 children, all girls, and they raised 3 of them into adulthood. Ireland maintained his civic commitment, serving several terms as a township assessor and working as the first sexton at the Mishawaka City Cemetery. The newspapers regularly follow the tragedy, the sorrow, and the mundane of Uncle Sam's illustrious life. They note that he owned one of the oldest clocks in the county. They mourned when he lost a daughter in 1872. They celebrated the Ireland's 50th wedding anniversary, and they waited on pins and needles when Sam Ireland teetered on the edge of death in 1885. He did recover from that scare and lived another 6 years, long enough for the Tribune to advocate that such a man as Uncle Sam Ireland should be superannuated from ever having to pay taxes. For as long as he had original pioneer friends, Sam Ireland kept close ties with them. When the county hosted larger and grander 4th of July parties each year, Uncle Sam was more apt to retreat to spend time at the old settlers' meetings. They'd remember the place they'd arrived, marvel at all of the ways it had changed, and sit contentedly knowing that they'd all played a part in it. When the old pioneer died in 1891 at the age of 83, the South Bend Tribune remembered that there was not a man as conscientious, as honorable, or as honest as Uncle Sam Ireland. In 1933, when the county set to rename its road, Samuel Ireland's name was an obvious choice. Ireland Road replaced Ice Road on the alphabetical grid, and Ireland Trail replaced Ice Trail just the same. None of Samuel Ireland's direct descendants would live to see the honor. Only one of his daughters ever married. None of them had children. Sam Ireland's direct line expired when his daughter Clarissa died in the family's Mishawaka home in 1924, but he did leave behind a long and proud legacy of nieces and nephews. I guess they didn't call him Uncle Sam for nothing.
It's 1891, and South Bend has a brand new millinery. Not sure what a millinery is? It's like a haberdashery, but for women. Not sure what a haberdashery is? Think hats. And when you think hats, think of brand new millinery at S.A. Matthews & Co. at 119 West Washington Street, where we only use, and this is true, the freshest flowers to make your stylish hat. And now back to A Bend in Time, presented by the History Museum.
It's in the 19th chapter of Genesis that Lot and his family fled to escape the destruction of Sodom. The angels had warned them and sent them hastily on their way, but provided one strange and specific caveat. No matter what happened, they were not to turn back. Of course, the story tells that Lot's wife couldn't resist rubbernecking the city that burned behind her, and for her insolence, she was turned into a pillar of salt. As for Lot Day, born in New Jersey in 1795 and transplanted to South Bend by 1831, he lived like a man who'd learned the lesson from the story of his biblical eponym. A pioneer through and through, Day was always on the lookout for new places, and for the duration of his life, he never, ever turned back. Born as one of 14 children in a crowded house, Day must have had a yearning for wide-open spaces since he was a youngster. He set during his earliest years to find a way to build a life of his own, joining the army when he was just 16 and rising to the rank of captain during Tecumseh's War in 1813. A year later, he mustered out of the military, still just 19, got himself married, and set to the important work of fathering a dozen children of his own. He established a business as a tanner and a brickmaker in Auburn, New York, but as that town grew, Day's claustrophobia overtook him. He took his young family and moved them west, settling in South Bend in 1831. South Bend had a population less than 120 when the Days arrived, but their brood would increase the town's census by a full 10%. Captain Lot Day, as virtually everyone in town called him, was ready to make his mark in a new place. He served as an early county commissioner before winning a term as county sheriff in 1842. The Days moved into a proud new home that same year, acquiring the Bainter Smith house at the corner of what is now LaSalle and Main Streets. The place was an iconic dwelling in the earliest years of South Bend. It was the first brick house in town, and its list of owners constitutes a who's who of South Bend's earliest figures, including Coquillards, Cottrells, DeFrieses, and Rushes. The Frederick Bainter who built the place was by all accounts known around town as Frederick the Great. During the 1840s, whoever lived in the old Bainter house might well have been the king of South Bend, at least to hear Chapman tell it in his History of St. Joseph County. Chapman loved this house. May its foundations never crumble. May no earthquake rend it, or tornado mar its modest proportions, or lightning scathe it, or devouring conflagration scorch it. Palsied be the hand that may ruthlessly despoil or remove this ancient landmark of South Bend's early civilization. And man, we do not write history with nearly the flair that we used to. Anyway, the house was torn down 10 years after Chapman's book was published. It's unclear whether anyone was stricken with palsy for the deed. Back to Lot Day. His accomplishments during his time in South Bend were significant. During his term as sheriff, he built a new prison with his own bricks for the tidy sum of $1,850. On a few occasions, he served in official roles in the state's Democratic conventions. But not everything was perfect for Lot Day and family. On July 4th, 1844, an unfortunate peacetime cannon accident left Day's son, Lot Day Jr., permanently disfigured. The boy lost a hand when the thing backfired, casting a pall over South Bend's Independence Day festivities that year. The younger Lot Day was still able to serve as the county's deputy sheriff beneath his old man, despite the crippling accident. By 1847, after multiple campaigns for the state senate, Captain Lot Day was finally elected to that body as a Democrat from South Bend. He only served one term, and by the time it ended, the old pioneer found himself visited by a nagging and recognizable itch. In 1850, there was a whole new West to conquer, and there was a new trail that was taking people there. Day left the Hoosier State for Oregon at the age of 50, a few years before the Studebakers came to South Bend to build the wagons that could have taken him there. He never came back. In total, Lot Day was in South Bend for fewer than 20 years, but he was honored with a road name in 1933. Day Road replaced Door Road in the north part of the county, long after the Day's children and grandchildren stopped living in Indiana. Captain Lot Day died in Elko, Nevada in 1874. He was buried in California. Hey, thanks for joining us on A Bend in Time presented by the History Museum in South Bend. There's more history waiting for you at historymuseumsb.org. I'm your host, Aaron Helman. The theme music is Whose Distance Is It Anyway by Neil Carmichael. Thanks again to the Doug Hunt family for underwriting this episode and all 8 episodes in the series. In our next episode, we're going to remember the only 3 streets named after African Americans, so far as I can tell. I hope you'll tune in for that one next. Until then, keep learning new things, and remember, everything is fascinating as long as you stay curious.